Hello, this is going to be a video that's going over the first lesson of Unit 7, Angle Relationships. So I'm going to be going over a couple different vocabulary terms as well as how we can use angle relationships to find missing values of angles. So you can use them to find out missing values. All right, so the learning target for this particular section is we'll identify relationships so we can use appropriate value and also find a missing angle. By the end of this video, she'll be able to describe the difference between supplementary and complementary angles. So we're going to be using this vocabulary constantly throughout this lesson and also the next lesson. And there's basically 4 vocabulary terms that you want to keep in mind. The first 2 are complementary and supplementary, and both have to do with the fact that 2 angles that add together to a certain degree value. So complementary, I'll start with that one, are angles that when you put them together that add to 90 degrees. So that would mean when we put 2 angles together, for example, 40 degrees and 50 degrees, that would be, those would add to 90 degrees. They're going to create a nice right angle. So sometimes they look like this, where this one might be like 45 and 45. Their sum is always 90 degrees. Sometimes they're not connected, they're separated, but the idea is the same. Maybe this was 20, and then you have another one that's 70 degrees. All of those are complementary. Supplementary are angles that add to 180. So supplementary angles would be when you connect them together, they create a straight line. So angles like 80 and 100, they would be supplementary. 20 and 160. And remember, 180 degrees makes a straight line. So any 2 angles, like if this was the angle here, we could say 120, and then this will be 60 degrees. Sometimes they're also not connected. They could be separated as well. You could have 2 right angles, 90 degrees, and another one that's also 90 degrees. Those are also supplementary. All right, the other 2 terms that we use are vertical. Vertical are angles that are across from one another. They're kind of on opposite ends when we're looking at 2 intersecting lines, and they're also congruent, or they're equal. Their angle measurements are the same. So if you look at 2 intersecting lines like these, we could look at this angle here. Maybe that's 60 degrees. Its vertical angle is down here at 60 degrees. So those 2 angles are vertical. And actually, within this x, this angle here we could say is 120. It is also vertical to the other blue angle that's 120 degrees. So those are vertical angles. And they only work with that intersecting line. They almost look like 2 V's kind of facing towards one another. The last word on here is adjacent, and adjacent just means that 2 angles that share a side and a vertex. So if you're looking, they don't necessarily have to add to anything, but let's say this angle and this angle here, they're adjacent because this angle is right there when we mark it, and the other angle is over here, and they kind of, you can see right here, they share this side together. So those are adjacent angles. They don't necessarily add to anything. They can, but adjacent just means that they share a side. So I'm going to go through each one of these. If you're writing these notes down, make sure that you pause it because I'm not going to give you time to copy them down. We're writing what types of relationships these are. So looking at the first one, 15 and 75, that adds to 90, so that would be complementary. And also, they share a side together. They share this side and this vertex. So they're also adjacent. This angle here, they're adjacent as well because they share this side here and that vertex. They also are supplementary. These are not supplementary. They're separated. So I'm sorry, they're not adjacent because they're separated, but they are supplementary because when you add 105 to 75, you get 180 degrees. So they're supplementary, but they are not adjacent. And the last two here, these lines are vertical to one another. The one is here, the other's here. You could almost imagine if you were to kind of cut this in half and fold it, that those two angles would overlap with one another. So these are vertical because they're across and equal. And if you add both of those angles together, they are also supplementary. Okay. All right. Then I had classmates kind of sort all these different ones. Just looking at them here, how they're in the different categories. Complementary, again, these are all ones that add to 90. Supplementary add to 180. They also make some nice lines. When you add these two angles together, they make this line. These two make this line. Those two make that line. So this is another way you can look at it. Those two make that line. And vertical, again, they're across and equal from each other. And then this is when we sorted them into adjacent and non-adjacent. So just take a look over at that if you need to. All the adjacent share a ray, a side and a vertex. The non-adjacents, in this case, are both vertical. So the other part of this is finding the missing angle. When you're finding the missing angle looking at the picture, it's kind of helpful for you to identify first how many degrees we're talking about. Is it 180, 90, or are they congruent? So in this case, they make this line here. So that means it's going to be supplementary, which means it's going to equal 180. So I know if I add 73 plus we don't know, I'm going to get 180 degrees. So from there, you can solve by subtracting 73 on both sides, and you get x is equal to 107. All right, these two here create a right angle. So that means when I add the x plus the 62, I'm going to get 90 degrees. And then if I solve for x here, or you can also just think, well, what would I add to it? I'm going to get 28. So that smaller angle is the 28 degrees. So these are complementary, and the other one is supplementary. These example here, the x and the 50 are across from each other and they're equal. So these, because they're the same, they're equal to one another. So that means the x is also equal to 50 degrees. And the last one for the example here, these two are going to create this line right here. So if I add the x plus 78, they're supplementary angles. They're going to equal 180. And then again, you subtract 78 on both sides and you get 102 degrees. Okay, and that's all for this video. Like I said, feel free to go back and watch it again if you need to, especially if you were absent the day of the lesson. Thanks for watching.